we have to recognize that there's an urgency here because we're right at the point of no return.
It didn't take long for Simon Wolle to understand the reality of his new job as one of the most visible Jewish advocacy leaders in Canada. He says it took only 13 seconds. That's how long it was after he made his first social media post as CEO of B'nai Brith Canada before somebody responded to it with a hateful online comment. Since taking over in October, only the fourth person to lead the organization in nearly 50 years, Wolle had plans to expand B'nai Brith's legacy programs like sports teams, clothing depots, food baskets, even bringing back the system of B'nai Brith lodges or chapters. But today, much of his focus is elsewhere. Advocacy, identifying and responding to hate, and making sure governments understand what's happening on the ground. Because since he stepped into the role, the situation has escalated. 3 Toronto synagogues and several Jewish businesses were targeted in a single week. A boycott campaign aimed at Jewish summer camps, and anti-Semitic rhetoric reaching the national stage during this past weekend's NDP leadership race. Wolle calls it a seismic shift. And yet, there have also been some developments he would agree show progress. Canada's border agency barred a French politician who'd praised the October 7th attacks. An Ontario court sentenced a neo-Nazi influencer to 20 years in prison. And Parliament passed Bill C-9, which is aimed at strengthening police tools to combat hate crimes. Still, with all of this unfolding, you might ask, why take this job now? After a successful career running Canada's largest independent Jewish community children's summer camp, Camp Northland in Haliburton, and before that, as an educator at Toronto's Tannenbaum Chat High School.
The crisis is real. The threats are real. The violence is real. The reason to be afraid, all of that is there. Yet, our community is going to get through this. And I have chosen to do this work because I'm one of many, 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 many people who believe that by doing this work, we can get to the end goal.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, March 30th, 2026. Welcome to North Star, the flagship podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granofsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. When Simon Wolle took over as CEO of B'nai Brith Canada, he spent his first months meeting political and civic leaders, including a debut on Parliament Hill calling for a royal commission on antisemitism. We sat down with him in mid-February at B'nai Brith's Toronto offices, taping just before the latest escalation between Israel, USA, and Iran. But even then, the concerns Wolle raised were already clear. And in the weeks since, some of the priorities he outlined, including calls for greater unity among mainstream Jewish advocacy organizations, appear to be starting to take shape. Simon, welcome. Thank you for having me in your studio here at the B'nai Brith headquarters lodge. I don't exactly know. Where are we?
First of all, Ellen, I'm excited to be here. I'm glad we're having this opportunity to talk together. We're in one of our affordable housing buildings.
What is B'nai Brith Canada in 2026, and what are they responsible for?
B'nai Brith Canada is a national organization that has many different arms that together share a larger common goal and vision, which is the strength and unity of really the Jewish community across Canada, along with all of the human rights efforts that we make. We also have a really strong research team trying to make sure that we identify hate in all of its forms, making sure that we're sharing that information with intelligence partners.
Well, you have an app. You have an anti-hate app as well.
That's right. A lot of our energy and a lot of our efforts today are going into advocacy.
Well, that's really important because I wanted to ask you, you were in other parts of the Jewish community before October of 2025 when you onboarded here. You started work as the CEO of B'nai Brith 2 years after October 7th. Why did you want this job at this time?
People don't find causes, causes find people. Like many people, with October 7th, it created a paradigm shift in our way of thinking. And even today, the question that I get asked the most by anybody is, what can I do to help? And me, like everybody else that I've encountered in this space, ask myself the same question. And when I did my own self-reflection on what is my background, what is my education, where is my experience, how do I take my advocacy, the work that I've done in law, the work that I've done in education, community building, volunteerism, understanding the nuances of really the top-down, left-right structure of the Jewish community, and say, how do we get aligned? How do we affect the change that we need? And how do we prevent the future that could unfold if we don't really get our act together as a community and make sure that we prevent this from happening in Canada and around the world? And for me, I just felt it was a calling in a way. I need to figure out how I can have the most impact in making the world a better place, whatever role I can play in that for my children, for my children's children, and for everybody else's as well. And that's really what drove me to this. And I decided to make a move. And it wasn't an easy move because I love the work that I was doing with the youth and the camps, and it's incredibly meaningful work. I just felt like I had something to give in a different space at this point in my life.
I saw a Instagram post that you put out just about maybe a month or 2 after you were in, where it was December 2025. Your children are in danger. You remember you were in your car recording this. What are you doing? Your daughters could be risk of kidnapped, exploited, and murdered for no reason. What are you going to do? Your son, don't wait. Make this country safe. Is it really that bad?
It's certainly been that bad for some people and in some of the cities around our country. Fortunately, these have been somewhat isolated when we talk about the extreme cases, right? We have situations where we have terrorist sympathizers and radicalized youth in that situation. We're talking about potential kidnapping and murder of random people.
Okay, so let's for our listeners and viewers, this happened December 19th when the Toronto police arrested or said that they had arrested months back 3 pro ISIS or ISIS sympathizers who were stalking the Jewish community and had kidnapped non-Jewish women.
In the same vein, we had a father and son in Ottawa, who also were radicalized in similar ways, and other examples like that in different places across the country. Those are real threats. This is not a hypothetical anymore. We're actually seeing words turn into action. We have to recognize that there's an urgency here because we're right at the point of no return. So, is it as bad as it could be? No. No, it can be a lot worse. But does that mean the situation that we're currently in is okay? Absolutely not. We're in the worst situation we've been in the history of this country. There is a national crisis of antisemitism. There is an unimaginable level of hate happening. We have our annual audit of antisemitism. Our 2025 report will be coming out in the spring. So I don't have those numbers to share.
Last year was over 6,000. Most of it, 80% is online threats.
I will say that at a very macro level, we're seeing increases in all aspects of anti-Semitic incidents across the country, whether it's physical, threatening, intimidation, online. It is widely across the board, rising, and with no sign of slowing down.
Okay, there are 3 main Jewish advocacy groups that speak on behalf of the Jewish community to government and elsewhere. There's you guys, there's CIJA, there's Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Canada. And in the past, people have said there's too much competition for time and airspace and turf. But in December, you all got together with a bunch of other Jewish organizations, mainstream center and center-right Jewish organizations in a unified front. Is that a change that you want to see where there's less competing for dollars for airtime and who gets recognition?
That is an unqualified yes, and I think it's actually absolutely necessary. And it's a place where not only I want to participate, it's a place where I am already and intending to be a part of leading, driving, supporting, and facilitating that with other like-minded leadership. And the joint statement that you referring to, the panel we put together with respect to Bill C9, that is one example of, I hope, many more. We are at a phase where we have to stop creating divisiveness in our community. Everybody has to put down the egos. Everybody has to extend their hand, point our fingers in a single direction, and say, this is where we're going. And that doesn't mean that we all have the same lane in that, but we have to be driving in the same direction. We have to set the GPS to a destination that we agree upon and get there together. And that must happen. It's not even an option. We have a lot of antagonists and groups that are out there facilitating and creating hate and intimidation who are very clearly aligned, who have a single goal. The contemporary anti-Semitism that we're seeing today with really just new versions of historical libels, genocide, occupiers, colonizers. This type of language is just today's version of drank Christian blood and control all of the banks and control the media. These are just new examples of ways to say, hey, if we say this, maybe we can get other people to also show their support for hatred of Jews. So we have to be aligned in our messaging. Part of our messaging needs to be that we are an incredible, strong, vibrant, resilient community that contributes to society in the most meaningful of ways, that brings our art, our culture, our understanding, our science, our knowledge, our education, our leadership into this country and makes it more beautiful. We have to make sure that we're telling the story of all of the light that we bring in. We don't have to agree on the nuances of every single issue that comes up, but the agencies and organizations that collectively represent the Jewish interest have to be able to sit in a room or deliver a message to media that basically says, this is what the Jewish people in our communities and across the country need to move forward in a healthy way. And that's what you're going to find from us. I also think we owe that to our community. A lot of our organizations are built on philanthropic dollars. We're no exception to that. Our donors expect that they're getting the full value of their contribution. They expect that they're not going to see duplication of effort.
All right, so tell me, what is your voice? What is your lane? What is B'nai Brith's lane?
When we're talking about the context of the fight against anti-Semitism specifically, I mention that because we are a broader human rights organization. But in this framework, with CIJA, Simon Wiesenthal, and others, we are community advocates. We take all of our research, we look at the data, and we say, okay, how do we actually tackle this now in a way that comes at it from multiple directions? How do we leverage the research team that we have across the country, make sure that we are giving accurate, factual, critical, timely data, make sure that we now get that information out to government, make sure that they understand what's actually happening on the ground. And we're also stewards of data.
The annual report and the hotline and the data. You have about 40 staff. I don't know how many do this particular annual report. So that's one. What else is your voice?
That's the tip of the iceberg, right? That's the public facing document that summarizes all of the work that's happening under the scenes. We are the advocates that are out there making sure that the voice of the Jewish community is heard. We are defenders of the Jewish community. If I had to say in sort of a summary way, where does B'nai Brith fit in the landscape? I would say that B'nai Brith is the barrier between anti-Semitism and the normalization of anti-Semitism. We prevent that from occurring by calling out individuals that are negatively impacting our culture, working towards normalizing hate. We have become experts in online extremism and radicalization, and understanding that that is one of the most imminent threats to Canadian culture and society in an effort to normalize hate and anti-Semitism. We are that barrier that sits in that space. That's a role that we play, and we do it with absolute fearlessness. And I think it's important to say that we are independent and we are beholden to nobody. And we are able to act swiftly, with authority, with credibility, with reason, yet fearless.
We saw you on make your, I guess, national debut when you were in Ottawa in January, when you had a press conference calling for not only a royal commission, right, on anti-Semitism, but also the replacement of the vacancy at the special envoy's for anti-Semitism position. Sadly, we know what happened with that second one, which is that they scrapped the whole thing and now making an advisory council. Can we talk about whether you know anything about what that advisory council is supposed to be looking like? Who's on it? Have you got any update? And is it better for the community, this, or is it a mistake what the government did?
This whole situation of the special envoy's office being empty for 6 months, it made me think of an airplane in the sky. And the pilot leaves, the cockpit for a minute. And At that moment in time, there's turbulence and the plane starts to rock and shake and everybody's scared and they're in danger. At that moment in time, there are other pilots around that could help. And there's, other people in this hypothetical airplane that could assist, but Air Canada or Air India or Air Australia or any airline out there, whoever's operating this airplane says, you know what, for now, we're going to just wait. We're going to let the autopilot kick in here and fly this airplane. And the turbulence continues to get worse and things get bad and things get bad. And then at some point, this governing airline, in this hypothetical example that I'm making up here, says, you know what, we're actually just not going to put a pilot in. Instead, we're going to create a council. And this council will be on the ground. We're not going to look at what the problem is with that actual airplane. We're going to look at the whole airline industry and we're going to say, let's do a study and let's bring in a few people. But you know what? We don't know who yet. We don't even know how we're going to pick these people. But at some point, we'll have some council that maybe people will be okay with, or maybe that'll just help things fizzle away and we can not deal with that problem in the air. And then, of course, we know that that plane has an inevitable fate in this scenario. And I think right now, the seriousness of what's happening, this national crisis of anti-Semitism, it is a crisis of danger. There's an entire people that are being threatened in this country. And the fact that right now the approach is to say, let's make a council that waters all of this down, that doesn't even name anti-Semitism for what it is. And then when we ask the questions, which we have, of, well, how is that council going to be formed? Nobody knows. Who's going to be on it? Nobody knows. What will their mandate be? Nobody knows. I will say that we are working on providing our somewhat unsolicited, but now we've learned welcomed suggestions.
What did you suggest?
Well, we're not at the point where I can talk about that yet, but we are actively putting together a roster of suggestions. We're also going to be, to your point earlier, reaching out to all of our partner agencies, some that you've mentioned and others, and saying, this is a place where we can be aligned. And let's make sure that we're leading. Let's make sure that we're at the table. We can't afford for this diluted committee to be constructed and then not have the proper representation, or potentially worse, potentially start to conflate ideas, maybe even become a forum where anti-Semitism in indirect ways can be encouraged, facilitated, strengthened, allowed to fester, possibly, even going in directions of bringing the conversation of anti-Palestinian racism into the same conversation as anti-Semitism, which of course would just be sending this whole process down a path of being completely irrelevant in any meaningful way to actually solve the problem. So I'm worried about this approach.
Okay, you met Prime Minister Carney. What do you think he is all about when it comes to the Jewish community? There was you in a picture, so I thought, okay.
I've met the Prime Minister briefly, but we haven't had a substantive conversation on this. I have in the PMO, so I can't comment specifically on what Carney's perspective is on
Fair
it.
enough.
I would like to. I've extended the invitation many times. I hope that the Prime Minister will take me up on that.
The second ask that you made in January was for this Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism. Is that reasonable to expect that that's not going to happen now either?
Well, I think we still need that. I think this is a way for the government to hold all institutions in our country accountable for what's going on. It can identify the root sources of the problem, the current reasons it's happening. We can have appropriate people involved in testifying, in this case under oath, as to what they're observing, what they're seeing, what possible solutions could come out of this. I don't think this is the solution that's going to solve the problem tomorrow. But I do think this is part of the solution that we need to have. I think anything less than that continues to minimize the seriousness of this. And I think this is an opportunity for the government to send a powerful message of, we recognize that this is not okay. And this didn't necessarily originate, it's certainly not isolated in Canada. We're seeing a phenomenon around the world of hatred. And this is an opportunity for Canada to actually show leadership and to say, what we're seeing in our country is not okay. And we're going to recognize that. We're going to name it. We're going to call it for what it is, identify it, and take the necessary steps to now improve it, both in terms of some long-term initiatives, but also some short-term. I mean, we need a full-time appointment to the IRA delegation from Canada. That's another gap. someone who's knowledgeable and experienced, who's dedicated to raising those issues both here and abroad. I'd add that as another point on the list of something else that they should be doing now, and that's a possible short-term initiative that they can take that could have some quick impact.
Bill C9, you mentioned earlier, B'nai Brith and the other major mainstream are supporting the government's passing of this combating hate law. Are there changes B'nai Brith still wants to see?
There are changes. We certainly are not satisfied with the law as it was drafted for consideration, and we've submitted all of that, and that's what the panel and the joint statement was all about looking at. Part of the problem, I guess, is we're seeing too much politics get in the way of solving problems. We need to take partisan politics out of hate. Say, how do we move the needle forward? Do we have enough laws right now? There's a very valid argument that could say, yes, we do, and that enforcement is the key, and that's what we should be doing. Lots of validity to that. And I do think we need more enforcement, and I do think we need focus on empowering police and educating police so they know what they can do and what they can't do and how they do it. Do I think that it would also be beneficial to, for example, look at hate at the charging stage instead of only at the sentencing stage? Yes, I do. I think if we put that into the mindset of Canadian culture, we start to actually shift how we look at hate. And we say, if you're hateful in what you're doing, it matters to us at the onset of how we're considering the crime. Does it help to say we're going to specifically identify a crime of, the displaying of terror symbols, for example?
Well, this is something B'nai Brith's been on and on trying to get community councils and city councils to adopt resolutions in Whitby and other city councils to ban the swastika, the Nazi swastika.
The Hakenkreuz. So these are the kind of amendments that we think will strengthen the bill, give it more teeth, will identify the specific things that will take us beyond current challenges of enforcement. I think we're in a situation where the answer to questions of what do we do is and. We need short-term solutions. We need long-term thinking. We need strategic planning. We need to name the problem. We need to take necessary steps with better legislation. We need to have people dedicated to fight anti-Semitism. We need a voice in government. We need to educate bureaucrats. We need to educate government officials. We need to fight against online hate. It's and we need strategies deployed with unity and consistent voices strengthened by the Jewish community agencies and institutions.
Coming up, Wolle talks about the developments not being abstract, but as defining the moment he's stepping into as the new CEO.
That's a lot for a new CEO after 4.5 months. What keeps you up at night now?
I'm going to flip that on you. I sleep well at night. And you know why I sleep well at night? I sleep well at night because I know that we have the most incredible staff working on all of these things that we're talking about. I know that we have a resilient community. I know that we bring light as a community to this country. I know that we are seeing joy in our spaces, that we're teaching our kids right from wrong. When I see all of these problems that are happening across the country and around the world, but I show up to the lobby of a building at Bathurst and Lawrence and Hanukkah and see everybody lighting candles together and singing Hanukkah songs after Bondi Beach, I say to myself, yes, we have all of these problems, and we are going to solve these problems together, just like we have done since the beginning of time. And I believe in our community. And I'm not saying that my days aren't hard. And I'm not saying that my mind doesn't race at night. I believe in what the other agencies are doing around this country to support the important work that we're a part of. I believe in our community overall. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say I really believe in our youth. And the more I spend time with the youth, the more I realize we're going to be okay. They need leadership. They need guidance. They need direction. They need us to pave the way like youth always does. But I believe that they're strong and resilient. And I think we're doing a good job with them. So I remain hopeful.
I have a yes and for you. I just did a story this week on Canadians who are talking about moving and leaving for Plan B. They are going to Panama for exploring. They're going to Florida. They're talking to real estate, Israel. There is a lot of anxiety out there. And so when I hear your wonderful, hopeful messages, it makes me feel good, but I see a different side of it.
I recognize how real those feelings are. I also know that if we run away, then we just start to move the border and delay the time of when we're going to have to face the problem that we're facing right now. So I look at it and I say, we're going to confront this now. We have the strength to do it. I believe we have enough solidarity and allied communities and people who understand right from wrong, who are willing to step forward. We're working on that as well. On the side, we have our Special Advisory Committee, our League for Human Rights, that builds relationships with dozens and dozens and dozens of different communities that will stand in solidarity with us, non-Jewish allies who are going to be activated, who are going to be taking the position that this is important, not just for the Jewish community, for all of Canada. And the crisis is real. The threats are real. The violence is real. The reason to be afraid, all of that is there. Yet, our community is going to get through this. And I have chosen to do this work because I'm one of many, 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 many people who believe that by doing this work, we can get to the end goal. How do we get there? We have a lot of work to do. And thankfully, we have some really smart, really dedicated, really passionate people in the space. And it's going to happen when we have the full grassroots community rise up and say, we're prepared to stand together. We're going to stop pointing fingers at each other. We're going to get aligned together as a community. We're going to recognize that we don't have to speak in total agreement on every nuance and issue, but we can speak with alignment and purpose and a voice that people can understand the direction we're seeking.
What's your time frame on this? 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years?
I think it's a combination. I think we're going to have to see short-term wins. I think we're going to have to change culture and strategy. I'm already seeing progress.
By the end of your first year, what would you consider a success?
Seeing more of what we're already seeing on the successes in greater volume and greater spaces, and I guess with wider impact. So things like, for example, having, maniac murder cult designated as a terrorist entity.
What about Muslim Brotherhood?
That would be a win. Following the money, Muslim Brotherhood has to be named. Certainly many chapters of Muslim Brotherhood have to be named and designated as terrorist organizations. So that whole side of things. Additional bad actors. So, Brennan Taylor Moore as an example of work being done on individuals.
Yeah, neo-Nazis.
Yes, and that's a big part of our energy. We could have another conversation around that because we're working on both of those sides of the spectrum as we speak. Seeing our community feel empowered, seeing people feel strengthened, seeing the connectivity that our community so desperately needs to feel.
How about releasing the Deschênes report? That was a big loss.
Yes, and that would be amazing to see progress in that space. And continuing work is happening right now behind the scenes for access to Holocaust records. We're working aggressively on that. Several active court cases, and we're going to continue to push. And that's what we do. We're going to fight. We're going to be fearless. We're not going to give up. We understand that this is a fight that no one can afford to lose because it's not a fight for the Jewish people alone. It's a fight for what we stand for as a country. I will not allow us to lose our country.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be here in the mobile studio of the CJN at the B'nai Brith Seniors Residence in Toronto. It's been great to talk to you.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Ellen.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounded like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. B'nai Brith's now demanding an apology from Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew for his words at the NDP convention on the weekend where Avi Lewis was elected the new leader. Kinew used what many Jewish leaders felt were anti-Semitic tropes blaming the Jews for the U.S. entering the war against Iran, when he called them Epstein elites. We'll continue to follow that story and bring you more when B'nai Brith releases its annual anti-Semitism audit in April. Wolle said the situation can improve but will take time. What do you think? Write to us at info@thecjn.ca. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany, with Michael Freeman as executive producer, Yael Scher as graphic designer, and Alicia Richler as editorial director. And our music is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.